All right, good afternoon, and thank you for being here. It's a gorgeous day outside finally on August 20th of this year, 2024. And we're going back a long, long time for this one. This one probably impacted your grandparents and maybe your parents. I'm not sure about that, but I know for a fact grandparents. It's going back to 1908. And in 1908, there was a women's movement. The really first civil rights movement in the United States was about women and getting equal rights such as voting and all that other stuff. How many of you watched the ball drop every year at Times Square on TV? It starts in 1908. Take Me Out to the Ball Game. This song is written in 1908, and you may think that Take Me Out to the Ball Game is about baseball, but it really isn't about baseball. William Howard Taft is elected President of the United States. Immigration is a major problem that is taking place. The old American people, the real Americans, don't want the new people coming in from Eastern Europe, and that included Jews and Italians and others. They wanted real people in their minds, Germans, Irish, not even the Irish, but Germans and the English and Scandinavians coming into the United States. Theodore Roosevelt says goodbye, the end of his presidency. And he is showing how strong America is. He sends out a Navy to go around the world to show Americans' strength. There are riots in Springfield, Illinois, lynchings. Lynchings are quite common in this era, back in 1908, 1909, 1910. Jack Johnson becomes the first African American to win the heavyweight crown in boxing. It doesn't create a problem in 1908, but eventually it would. There is the Bosnian crisis of 1908, which is thought to be a minor European thing that later on, 6 years down the road, World War I would break out because of this and other factors. How'd you like to own this car, the Model T?
I would.
From 1908, the first one. Well, Henry Ford puts out the Model T for the first time back in 1908. And there is a car race. There are 6 cars going around the world, a car race to show how the automobile is a big deal now, if you could afford it. This was the biggest building in the world, Lower Manhattan, the Singer Building. It's no longer there, but back in 1908, it was the biggest skyscraper in the world. And Wilbur Wright, remember the Wright brothers? Well, just 5 years after he and his brother invented the airplane, he sets a flight record in Paris. Life in 1908, and this is what life in 1908 was like. It begins with the ball drop at Times Square, ends with Wilbur Wright's record-setting, mind-bending demonstration flight. He's up there for 2 hours and 20 minutes, and it isn't like the planes today. He's out there totally exposed. He has, he's basically in his clothes and basically the elements, or he's fighting the elements. In between, Henry Ford introduces the Model T. 6 automobiles left Times Square and then going around the world, and you're going to ask me how they get around the world. I'll tell you that in a few minutes. There was a murderous anti-black riot that took place in Springfield, Illinois, and that is where Abraham Lincoln, of course, was for a long time. America was on par with Britain and Germany as a global power. U.S. citizens enjoyed the highest per capita income in the world. Don't don't really look at that saying, hey, they were rich. They were making an average of about 22 cents an hour at work. 22 cents an hour. Anyway, and there were railroads and there were automobiles, there was the telegraph, there was the telephone, there was electricity, and there was gas. America is modernized, at least in the cities, and you got the city versus rural split. Men shave their whiskers with something new, disposable razors. Women tidy their homes with a new device called a vacuum cleaner. the vacuum cleaner. Couples danced to the old Victrola, the old record player, in their living rooms and snuggled in dark theaters to watch flickering images of the Vitagraph or the silent film. That was what life was like in 1908 if you had some money, but a lot of people were like this. This is child labor. This is child labor in a mine, and there was a lot of child labor going on back in 1908. Most Americans lived in poverty or near poverty. The working class, including 2 million children, joined adults in the steel mills or the coal mines, and they labored long hours in occupations that were grueling and often very dangerous. Tens of thousands of Americans died on the job in 1908. The average American worker earned between $200 and $400 a year. Now, if you take that money and you put it in today's money, the $200 would be $6,800 in income today per year to about $13,600. So you can see there wasn't much money going around. They averaged 22 cents per hour, the workers, which today would be $7.51. Now, the federal minimum wage in the United States since 2009 is $7.25 an hour. That meant these people are making more than the federal minimum wage of today. America was a nation of 46 states. 90% of the people were white, and more than half the population lived in rural areas. North Dakota and Montana were still open to homesteaders. Arizona and New Mexico, not states, their territories, were largely unsettled. Florida's southern half was a wilderness of mangrove swamps. In fact, it was around this time that the railroads were starting to go as far south as Palm Beach and Miami Beach. The nation in many ways was unfair, unpleasant, and violent. Kids worked in coal mines, in steel mills. In 26 states, marriage between whites and blacks were illegal. And that was life in 1908. And in 1908, Americans didn't want immigrants. They tried to get the immigrants out. The melting pot. You've heard that term, melting pot? America's a melting pot, right? You've heard that term. Melting pot entered the American lexicon. People started talking about America as a melting pot, but only in the terms because a playwright coined it. A guy by the name of Israel Zangwill, to denote the nation's capacity to absorb and assimilate different ethnicities and cultures. According to Zangwill, the melting pot was a cauldron, roaring, bubbling, stirring, and seething. But he did not use it as a term of endearment necessarily. He used it as a term that people are thrown together in this thing called America. Violence frequently erupted. Anarchists ignited bombs, particularly on the Lower East Side of New York in the Italian section. Gangs of loosely organized extortionists known as the Black Hand dynamited tenements in New York's Little Italy. Arms of disgruntled tobacco farmers called the Night Riders galloped through Kentucky and Tennessee, spreading terror. The women's movement, though, around the country and around the world is growing because women are getting very upset at being treated as second or third or fourth class citizens. They have brains, they have ability, and yet the women are put down. Now, Happy New Year, 1908. That is the first ball that came down in Times Square. It was a brainchild of the Oaks family who ran the New York Times, and they were looking for a way of selling more newspapers. They had this place called Times Square, and they figured, let's drop a ball. People will come, as they do today, 116 years later, and celebrate the new year. So this is the first time the ball was dropped. On December 31st, 1907, the New Year's Eve ball made its maiden descent from a flagpole atop Times Square. They dropped it with on the flagpole. Didn't go very far, but that's where they dropped it. It's part of the 1907-1908 festivities. Waiters in the fabled lobster palaces and other deluxe eateries and hotels surrounding Times Square were supplied with battery-powered top hats with the numbers 1908 on their little flash bulbs. And they're walking around serving you dinner with these hats on, and it keeps flashing 1908. That's how they celebrated the beginning of the new year in Times Square. At the stroke of midnight, they all flipped their lids, and the year on their foreheads lit up in conjunction with the number 1908 on the parapet of the Times Tower, lighting up to signal the arrival of a new year. Has it changed much? Really not, except it's gotten huge, and a lot of people get there. And now you get there about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they put you in cages, and you better wear a diaper, because there are no bathroom facilities. You're there, you're stuck. Take me out to the ball game. Well, there was a songwriter who saw this poster on a subway. It says, "Take ball game today at the Polo Grounds." Anybody here used to see New York Giants baseball games?
That's not one.
New York Giants baseball. That's a long time
no,
ago.
the Yankees. No, I didn't see New York Giants.
No, that's 67 years ago since the last game
I could have.
that featured the New York Giants. Anyway, so this guy, Jack Norwood, he's a lyricist. He's in vaudeville, and he's riding the subway. And he sees this poster, you know, those posters around the subway, Dr. Zinmore's Zit applications to get rid of acne and all that other stuff. Well, I don't know if he was there in 1907, but Norwood, 1907, 1908, sees this sign. He begins to think, I should write a song about baseball. Well, there were plenty of songs about baseball. Baseball really came into its own in the as part of the American culture after the Civil War, and there were a lot of baseball songs. But you don't know any of them except for this one today. But is this a baseball song? Yes or no? It's a good question. Jack Norworth claimed he scribbled the words on an envelope after seeing a sign on the subway of New York City, "Baseball Today, Polo Grounds." The songwriters, it was a dual effort. Norworth came up with the words. Albert von Tilzer came up with the music, and they never saw a baseball game. They had no idea what baseball was about. But this guy decides he's going to write a song, he's got the lyrics, he's going to see his friend Albert, and Albert, you come up with the music. On May 2nd, 1908, the United States Copyright Office received 2 copies of a new song called "Take Me Out to the Ball Game." Was it a baseball song? I'm going to read you the lyrics to it. By the way, the only part of the song that you know is "Take Me Out to the Ball Game," right? Do you know there are other parts to that song? There are other parts to that song. And who sings this song, a man or a woman? Who sings it? To "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" part? Okay. Is it a man or is it a woman? Oh, maybe this will answer it for you. "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" by Jack Norwood. Katie Casey was baseball mad, had the fever and had it bad. Just to root for the hometown crew, every sou, that was slang for French currency in those days, every sou Katie blew. On Saturday, her young beau called to see if she'd like to go to a show. But Miss Kate said no. I'll tell you what you can do. This is a woman telling the guy this is what she wants to do. "Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I ever get back. Let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game." It is a woman singing the song. It is not a man. Now, who is Katie Casey? I don't know. She might be from Brooklyn. She might be from Manhattan. She's Irish, so it's probably lower Manhattan. She's on the subway, or she might be on the subway, and the boyfriend says, What do you want to do? Let's go to a show. She doesn't want to go to a show. She's part of the new women's movement of 1905, 1906, 1907. We don't know much about Katie Casey, except we know that she goes to the baseball game, she knows all the players, and she sits in the front row. And if an umpire makes a wrong call, she's going to let the umpire know he made a wrong call. Women didn't do that in 1908. So who is this woman, Katie Casey? Well, the song was written as Jack Norworth's ode to his girlfriend, the progressive and outspoken Trixie Ferganza. Delia O'Callahan's her name, a famous vaudeville actress and suffragist. Two of the original editions of the sheet music feature Ferganza. And this is her in 1908. And she is leading a women's march for the right to vote in Manhattan. So she is Katie Casey. Well, she wasn't somebody who's in her 20s. She was somebody who already is in her mid-30s by this point. She was a well-known vaudeville star by the time she was 19 in 1889. So what would she be? She'd be about 38 years old when the song came out. She was a well-known comedic actress. Off stage, she was an influential and prominent suffragist who advocated for women's social and political equality. At the time the song was written, women rarely attended a baseball game. They were never at baseball games. The park was not thought of a place fit for a woman. The crowd was filled with gamblers and drunks, and also the players were never thought of as family men. So it wasn't a place really for women, not at all. But she's there. And not only is she there, she's in the front row arguing with the umpire. Katie Casey knew baseball. She was not happy with umpires. She was standing in the front row. She was part of the new woman movement of the early 20th century. She took the lead. She was engaged. She was living in the world. She was uninhibited and filled with passion. Most women in those days were subservient to their husbands. Whatever their husbands said, they did. That's it. That's what they did. They didn't really have much, their opinions were kept to themselves. They were not allowed to have opinions. They weren't even allowed to have property in the most cases. The woman who made the song famous is this woman by the name of Norma Bays. In 1908, she and Norworth, they got married. They had one other song that you might have heard of. I don't know if you ever did or not. But they wrote together something called Shine On Harvest Moon. Shine On Harvest Moon. You ever hear that story, that song? Huge song. Of the two songs, though, which one survived as a everyday song? Take Me Out to the Ball Game, at least from Norwood's standpoint. Nora Bays, who was Dora Goldberg, her wife, his wife in 1908, popularized the two songs along with Shine On Harvest Moon, which they co-wrote. Bays was very popular. She was a stage singer who starred in the Ziegfeld Follies of 1908, the first Ziegfeld Follies, with Norwood. The song took off. It sold 6 million copies of sheet music. Take Me Out to the Ball Game was extremely popular in 1908. And people just assumed it was about baseball. It wasn't. Edward Meeker recorded the song for Thomas Edison and Edison Records. Movie theaters featured it during intermissions with lyrics on the screen, encouraging the audience to sing the chorus about where Katie wants to go. Take me out to the ball game. Did you ever think of that as a woman's lip song? Never. You never did. Well, it is. It's probably the first song that you can consider a woman's lip song. All the other songs that women sang were all love songs back in those days. Crackerjack, which had been around since 1893, saw soaring sales after it was mentioned in the song. But oddly enough, neither the American League nor the National League in baseball, the team owners, embraced the song. To them, it was just another song about baseball, like the baseball polka. He didn't think much of it. But this is what's going on at the time. Gibson Girl. Ever hear of the Gibson Girl? It was a big deal back then, the Gibson Girl. Gibson was a cartoonist, and he's attempting to show women can do things, that they're good looking, they're athletic, they're smart, and don't take them for granted. The Gibson Girl was the personification of the feminine ideal of physical attractiveness as portrayed by the pen and ink illustrations of the artist Charles Dana Gibson. Gibson Girl, vibrant, new feminine ideal, who is the visual embodiment of the new women. The Gibson Girl pursued higher education, romance, marriage, physical well-being, and individuality with unprecedented independence. In other words, she's not a real American girl. American girls are supposed to get married, have kids, be subservient, don't tell your opinion to anybody, be quiet, be a nice girl. Gibson Girl was not a nice girl. She wanted to be educated. At the end of the 19th century, there was a growing notion with new ideas of women's sexuality and empowerment. It set the stage for the new women movement in the beginnings of feminist writings and publications. The new woman movement was a push for female autonomy. The new woman movement placed a heavy emphasis on independence and autonomy of oneself. In other words, you don't get married when you're 17. Go out, get educated, live a little bit. You don't have to do that anymore. It's not the 19th century. And here's the new women's movement, and check out how she's dressed. Check her out. That's what the new women's movement was all about. She's got the socks on and all that other stuff, and she's watching some other woman clean her house. The movement encouraged women to find economic and social stability without men. The movement pushed for educated and independent women. The new women movement called for women to expand and be more than just the woman of the house and push into the public sphere, including politics. Again, Trixie Forganza, she wanted to vote. And there were a lot of other women who wanted to vote. And here she is again, and there's Trixie Forganza, who lasted into the talking movie stages. The members of the Women's Progressive Suffrage Union held its first suffrage march in the United States in New York City, and guess who's there? Trixie. She's at the October 28th rally and said, "I do not believe any man, at least no man I know of, is better fitted to form a political opinion than I am." So she's telling you right now, I have a brain, I can think too. And do you think that was a popular sentiment in those days? Not at all. Women, what were they supposed to be? In the house. Not supposed to be seen, except going out. That's basically it. Younger women were concerned with sexual freedom and equality and demonstrated this by experimenting with public behavior in new gender roles. Forganza used her celebrity status to promote and further the rights of women, as well as other causes, such as promoting the arts to economically disenfranchise. In other words, the arts should be for everybody, including poor people, not just rich people going out there and enjoying themselves. Newspapers noted that many performances in which she was involved held performances for orphans and children of lower income families. Some male intellectuals criticized new women for being consumer-oriented, morally depraved. Morally depraved. How's that for a good description of these women? And sexually promiscuous. Some women were also unused to the idea of women's independence. Anyway, this is New Zealand. And this is in New Zealand. We're talking about women should vote. And male electors only on this old bicycle. And on this new bicycle, male and female equal electoral rights. It's all around the world. It's in England. It's in New Zealand. It's in Australia. It's all over the place. It's in Sweden and Switzerland. Women are waking up. How come we can't vote? And by the way, how come you couldn't vote? Is there any reason? There is. The men didn't want you to vote. That's the reason. They didn't want you to vote at all. There was freedom for women, such as the ability to ride bicycles. Think of that. Women were not supposed to ride bicycles. Travel independently and consume new products. However, the movement also faced criticism for both men and women who were uncomfortable with the changing roles of men and women. There was concern that the new woman endangered not only the social order, but also the natural order. Many in the medical community supported the idea that the development of the woman's brain caused infertility. That's what doctors said. What do you think? That if you got smarter, you wouldn't be able to have kids? That was the thinking. Some people concluded that the survival of humankind was endangered by women's education. You want to turn back the clock? There was concern that, anyway, about that. And there was also this, the immigration problem. And this is the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And people start seeing pictures of this. So you got the new women's movement going on, and you have the immigration problem. And what's going on at the Lower East Side, or in the Lower East Side of Manhattan. That's where I was born back in the 1950s, 1956. So I know a little bit about these tenements, but pictures like this are going around the country. And people are getting upset. We're being overrun by immigrants. What are we supposed to do? The immigrants are coming here, they're going to take our jobs. They're bad people. We got to get rid of them. They're basically, why are they here? And Teddy Roosevelt's asking the same question. New York City was not the only city with tenement buildings, but became ground zero in the battle to limit immigration. Thousands of immigrants coming through Ellis Island. How many of your relatives came through Ellis Island? Yours did? No. Yours did? Where'd they come from originally?
Italy.
Italy. Oh, this is right up your alley then. This is right up your alley. What was going on in those days is the immigration was rather easy. As long as the United States had a treaty with a country, people would be able to come in. There was the Italian earthquake, and the Italian earthquake, a lot of people came in after the Italian earthquake.
And that's why my grandparents.
That's why your grandparents came in. Thousands of immigrants coming through Ellis Island to start a new life in America found affordable housing in unsafe buildings. And landlords said, come on in. You want to pay? Yeah, you want 25 people in the room? No problem with 25 people in the room as long as you pay me the rent, and you can have as many people in there as you want. If a resident became exposed to diseases like smallpox or tuberculosis, it would rapidly spread through the building. If the water became contaminated, the whole building would become ill. Something needed to be done. Immigration was a problem that needed to be solved. So there was something called the Dillingham Commission. Dillingham was a senator from Vermont, and Teddy Roosevelt appointed him, and they are now looking at how you solve the immigration problem, and these guys are going to solve it. Now, there's a problem with this. Teddy Roosevelt believed in eugenics, and that would be the order of race in the world. So he was a big believer in eugenics. The Dillingham Commission produced perhaps the most extensive investigation of immigration in the history of the country, a 41-volume study that demonstrated just how vital 19th century and early 20th century immigrants were to the U.S. economy. Congress created the commission in 1907 in an effort to find a compromise between proponents and opponents of immigration. During the previous several decades, pundits and lawmakers debated the need to impose restrictions on immigration. Lawmakers enacted several policies intended to interdict those deemed to pose a specific danger, such as people afflicted with a contagious disease or involved in moral turpitude. The Chinese Exclusion Act, 1892, was the first time America tried to stop immigrants from coming over, and these are the people who built the railroads. One notable act excluded Chinese laborers. Another prohibited the entry of workers who had been hired overseas by U.S. companies. The Chinese Exclusion Act was approved on May 6, 1882. Cut immigration. See all those people that are trying to come in from Europe? Put them through a funnel and just take the best. The rest of them, so what? That's what they intended to do. The literacy test, a requirement that most adult immigrants be able to read or write, became the preferred restriction. Supporters saw it as the best means of securing the most desirable migrants, while critics saw education as a product of opportunity, not character or potential. In 1907, when Congress could not agree on its propriety, it created the Dillingham Commission, starting in 1908, named for the chairman, Senator William P. Dillingham, who was a Vermont Republican. This guy is an interesting guy. He's part of that committee. Dr. Franz Baus. You've heard about Mengele in Germany during the Nazi time, Dr. Mengele? Well, I think he took notes from this guy, and you'll see why in a second. The 9-member commission, comprised of 3 U.S. senators, 3 representatives, and 3 experts, selected by President Theodore Roosevelt, fulfilled its charge by conducting a thorough and wide-ranging investigation of current and past immigration. Most of the work centered on the immigrants in industry, but other topics included immigrants in cities, children of immigrants in schools, and a study of changes in immigrant psychology conducted by the anthropologist Dr. Franz Boas. He and his associates started measuring the heads of immigrants. They wanted to see if the heads of the immigrants, the craniums that were coming in, were the same as the English that came in, the Germans that came in, the Scandinavians that came in prior to 1890. So he started measuring the skulls and the craniums of kids in school to see if they fit the American prototype. Because they're worried about changes in bodily form. The children had features less like their European counterparts and more like American types. The commissioner, Jeremiah Jenks, also prepared a controversial dictionary of races in which he sought definitive identity and characterized the world's races and ethnic groups. And these are the immigrant children coming through Ellis Island. And they are being looked at. Not only are they looked at for disease, but they're looked at to see the size of their heads. My wife said I never would have made it here because she has a big head. O.J. Simpson wouldn't have made it here because his nickname was Buckethead. Big heads. Immigration. The early 20th century saw a large influx of immigrants to the United States, particularly from Southern and Eastern Europe, like your grandparents. This wave of immigration contributed to the cultural diversity of the country. Most immigrants ended up in the American cities where jobs were located. This is, I didn't know this until last week, about Jacob Schiff. I was talking to one of my cousins who now lives in Toronto. We lived in Brooklyn when we were kids. And I was just going back and forth and said, I'm doing this 1908, 1911 talk about the Jews who came in through Galveston, Texas, through immigration. I'll tell you that story in a minute. He said, my maternal grandparents came in through Galveston, Texas, as opposed to New York or Boston. And they ended up in Des Moines, and then they ended up in Brooklyn eventually. This guy is Jacob Schiff. He had a lot of money. It's the Galveston movement. Too much Jewish immigration into New York and Boston. rabbis get together, start talking to immigration officials saying, we need to place these immigrants somewhere else. Too much anti-Semitism in New York, too much anti-Semitism in Boston. We got to put them somewhere else. Enter Jacob Schiff. The Galveston Movement, or the Galveston Plan, was a U.S. immigration assistance program operated by several Jewish agencies starting in 1907. Immigrants come in 1908. The program diverted Jewish immigrants fleeing Russia and Eastern Europe away from the big cities in the East Coast, New York and Boston. Jacob Schiff was a New York financier and a philanthropist. He's the driving force behind the effort, which he supported $500,000 of his money, $16.4 million today, to get them to go somewhere other than New York. And the Immigration Restriction League starts. It starts in 1904 in Boston. And basically, they say, we don't want these immigrants here. This is Boston, which is why the rabbis in Boston started talking, because you have the Immigration Restriction League, and they know that Jews are not welcome anymore in Boston. The Immigration Restriction League was organized by Harvard graduates in 1894 and headed by the president of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. These are two great schools, MIT, Harvard, and they're saying, keep the immigrants out. They lobbied nationwide to restrict Jewish and Southern Italian Catholic immigration, contending that the new immigrants, who apparently also brought crime and idiocy, not only crime, but idiocy, threatened the American race. In response to the peaking levels of immigration, 3 Harvard alum, three Harvard lawyers, including Charles Warren, climatologist Robert DeCory Ward, and attorney Preston F. Hall, established the Immigration Restriction League to press for laws to check for the burgeoning influxes, which now originated in greater proportion from Eastern and Southern Europe. And this is the bylaws, the constitution of the Immigration Restriction League, written by 2 Harvard lawyers. Now, 2 Harvard lawyers decide, hey, we got to stop immigration. And they try. The Immigration Restriction League and other restrictionists claim authority. This is where they claim authority from. Charles Darwin. Who's Charles Darwin? He's a writer. Anyway, from social Darwinism beliefs in the science of eugenics to advocate a literacy test as a measure to keep out non-assimilating and undeserving. Who's undeserving? Who's the one? It's pogrom, Russia. All dead Jews there. That's why they were leaving. So Jacob Schiff and the Galveston Movement increased anti-Semitic pogroms in Tsarist Russia, starting in the early 1880s, led to a tidal wave of Jewish immigration to the United States. The established Jewish elite in America had long sought to increase U.S. government diplomatic involvement to alleviate similar situations in Europe, and strongly continued open immigration generally as a way to accomplish this. Schiff, engineered the Galveston Movement, which diverted Russian Jewish immigrants from New York to the port of Galveston, Texas, from which they found new homes throughout the South and the Midwest. He had hoped that would stem a wave of anti-Semitism that was seemingly fueled by visions of crowded New York City tenements. This is a woman who left Bremen on a ship. Her name is Sarah Bernstein, and she ended up in Galveston, Texas, passed that quarantine, poorly passed the immigration. She came from Germany and ended up in Galveston. The Jewish Immigration Information Bureau was based in Galveston, Texas, and directed the movement, and it was a means of preventing an anticipated wave of anti-Semitism on the eastern seaboard, which might lead to immigration restrictions. It sought to find suitable alternative destinations for the influx of immigrants. Charleston, South Carolina, New Orleans, and Galveston, Texas were considered. Charleston had a long line of Jews there. They had an established Jewish community, but they said, nope, we want Anglo-Saxon immigrants. We don't want any more Jews. New Orleans was a thriving urban center where Jews might be inclined to settle and then move to the interior, except there was a problem with yellow fever. It was yellow fever time. So that left Galveston, and this guy, Rabbi Henry Cohn. Rabbi Henry Cohn of the congregation B'nai Israel in Galveston, Texas, organized the Galveston movement. The Jewish Immigration Information Bureau worked to attract Jews emigrating from the Russian Empire and Eastern Europe to Galveston and the Gulf Coast. Cohen and other Texas Jewish leaders wanted to not only strengthen Jewish communities in Texas and the center of the country, but to lessen potential conflicts arising from heavy immigration to the Northeast and prevent restrictions on immigration being passed by Congress. This is to let you know that Sarah Bernstein arrived safely, yours truly, and was sent to whoever her relatives are, wherever they were. Galveston was judged the best. Its small size would not encourage large number of Jews to settle there permanently and provided convenience and closest access to growing economic opportunities in Texas, the American Midwest, and the West. But the overcrowding in New York remains a major concern. Something needs to be done. What are we supposed to do? Well, there's no answer in 1908. Theodore Roosevelt's not running for president. The bully pulpit. This is from Oyster Bay, his home in Oyster Bay. He's not running. Even though he's eligible to run. He could have run, in fact, he could have run for a fourth term if he wanted to. After his 1904 electoral victory, Theodore Roosevelt promised publicly not to seek the presidency in 1908. He vigorously promoted William Howard Taft as his successor. Both Nellie Taft and Roosevelt, Nellie being the wife, had to persuade Taft to make the race. Even with the presidency in his reach, Taft much preferred the U.S. Supreme Court Chief Justice appointment. Up to the last minute before Taft's nomination at the Republican Party convention in Chicago, Nellie Taft feared that Roosevelt might announce his bid for a second elected term. Only when President Roosevelt sent word to the senator from Massachusetts, Henry Cabot Lodge, that he was not available, did the nomination, or actually the convention, nominate Taft on the first ballot. Theodore Roosevelt's not running. He's not running at all. This guy is William Howard Taft. Taft's campaign, once it started, depended heavily upon Roosevelt for speech-making, advice, and energy. Journalists bombarded the public with jokes about being Taft, or about Taft being a substitute for Roosevelt. One columnist explained that T-A-F-T, Taft, stood for Take Advice from Theodore. Nothing could hide Taft's dislike for campaigning and politics. His handlers tried to turn his sluggish style into a positive asset, describing Taft as a new kind of politician, one who refuses to say anything negative about his opponent. For most voters, it was enough, however, Taft had pledged to carry on Roosevelt's policies. This guy, William Jennings Bryan, is running again. He lost the presidential election to William McKinley in 1896 and 1900, but he's out there again. So all of a sudden he's there, even though he's a loser, but he's a populist, and he still has some pull in the party with the silver right wing. He lost in 1896 and 1900, but he takes control of the Democratic Party, wins the endorsement of local and state organizations, and conservative Democrats again sought to prevent Bryant's nomination, but they could not do so. So he's nominated on the first ballot. At the convention, he's joined by John W. Kerr, the former state senator from the swing state of Indiana. He's his running mate. And there he is, giving his speeches, William Jennings Bryan. He campaigned on a party platform that reflected his long-held beliefs, but the Republican platform also advocated for progressive policies, so there are very few differences between the two parties. One issue that the parties differed on was Bryant wanted national banks to have deposit insurance. In case the bank went, you didn't lose your money. It was federally protected. Taft was against that. Put your money in the bank, you lose it, too bad. He largely unified the leaders of his own party, and his pro-labor policies won him the first presidential endorsement ever issued by the American Federation of Labor. As in previous campaigns, Bryant embarked on a public speaking tour to enhance his candidacy. But there's William Howard Taft, there's James Sherman. Taft would win. He carried all but 3 states outside the Democratic Solid South, 321 electoral votes to Bryant's 162. Taft got about 7.7 million votes, 51% of the voters. Bryant, 6.4%, 43%. And the socialist candidate, Eugene V. Debs, 420,000 votes, 2.8% of the popular vote. Bryant and Henry Clay are the only candidates who received electoral votes in 3 separate presidential elections and lost all 3. So what's Roosevelt's legacy? Well, that thing no longer is in front of the Museum of Natural History. It was taken down. Was Roosevelt a racist? Was he a eugenicist? On September 14, 1901, Theodore Roosevelt became the 26th President of the United States following the assassination of William McKinley. He had been President for only, well, 6 months, 194 days when he succeeded to the presidency. He avoided labor strikes, most notably negotiating a settlement to the Great Coal Strike in 1902. He vigorously promoted the conservation movement, emphasizing efficient use of natural resources. He dramatically expanded the number of national parks and national forests. He created 5 national parks, battled mining interests, and kept the Great Grand Canyon, or the Grand Canyon, and it becomes one of the 16 national monuments. He oversaw the creation of 20 federal irrigation projects, 13 national forests, 16 bird refuges. There's Teddy Roosevelt getting the 1906 Nobel Prize. He was active in world politics in Europe, in Asia. He won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1906 for mediating an end to the Russian-Japanese War, and he secured the route and began construction on the Panama Canal. In 1908, he invited state leaders and scientists to the White House for a conference on conservation of natural resources. As a result, 41 states created conservation commissions, and the National Conservation Commission was established. But he might have been a racist. He didn't see all black Americans as equals. As a race and in the mass, they are altogether inferior to whites. He sent a letter to a friend in 1906. He also believed black men made poor soldiers. He denigrated the efforts of the Buffalo Soldiers who fought alongside his men at San Juan Hill during the Spanish-American War in 1898, falsely claiming they ran away from fire. Negro troops were shirkers in their duties and would only go as far as they were led by white officers, he wrote. However, he's got Booker T and TR at the White House. Booker T. Washington dines with Roosevelt at the White House. He is one of the leading proponents of the civil rights movement in the United States, but Roosevelt got rid of 160 black soldiers from service, assuming that all of them colluded in a criminal shooting spree. But while governor of New York, a distinguished colored singer was denied at an Albany, New York hotel. Couldn't stay there. The circumstance having reached Roosevelt, he went in person and invited the citizen to his residence where he gave him lounging. When he assumed the office of vice president, his first act was to appoint a colored man an executive messenger against the protests of certain officials. So what was he? He was the first president to entertain a colored man. What was he? Here's Roosevelt, along with Native Americans. Roosevelt's considerable time spent ranching in the Dakota Territory only hardened his mindset against Native Americans. I don't go so far to think that the only good Indian is a dead Indian, he said in 1886, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are, and I shouldn't like to inquire too closely into the case of the 10. The most vicious cowboy has more principle than the average Indian. As president, he favored the removal of Native Americans from their ancestral territories, including approximately 86 million acres of tribal land transferred to the National Forest System. His signature events of environmental conservation and the establishment of national parks came at the expense of people who stewarded the lands for centuries. So what was he? What was it? His racial philosophy of white superiority dovetailed with the support of the eugenics movement, which advocated selective breeding to engineer a race of people with more desirable characteristics and sterilization of less desirable people, such as criminals, people with developmental disabilities, and for some, people of color. He shared similar views on race with prominent figures of the time, including Alexander Graham Bell, John D. Rockefeller, and Winston Churchill. But preserve the Grand Canyon. There it is, the Grand Canyon. He supported the policies of assimilation for indigenous Americans to become integrated into the broader part of American society. These policies over time contributed to the decimation of the Native culture and communities. Roosevelt viewed Native Americans as impediments to the white settlement of the United States, believed that the white frontiersmen had forged a new race, that American race, by ceaseless strife waged against wild man and wild nature. America was two countries, white men ruling, Jim Crow caste system for Negroes. Speak softly, but carry a big stick. On the bright, windless morning of December 16, 1907, thousands of spectators went to Hampton Roads, Virginia, to hail the departure of the Great White Fleet on its 43,000-mile voyage around the world. Roosevelt steamed in from Chesapeake Bay aboard the presidential yacht, the Mayflower, to give last-minute instructions to fleet commanders and add his considerable heft to the pomp and circumstances. The fleet was designed to send a message around the world: don't mess with America. It was 16 Navy battleships. They went to several countries and harbors, part of a 14-month voyage around the world, and the fleet's purpose was to demonstrate American goodwill, naval power to the world. Ships were painted white, the Navy's peacetime color, decorated with gilded scrollwork, red, white, and blue banners on the bows. But Roosevelt made it clear, don't mess with America. Meanwhile, in America, there's this, the Springfield, Illinois riots, which will seem to be happening annually somewhere in the United States. Violence against African Americans persisted with dozens of lynchings. On August 14th, whites in Springfield, Illinois, ironically the hometown and resting place of Abraham Lincoln, tried to drive black citizens from the city, burning black businesses and homes, and lynching 2 black men. After being accused of unrelated sexual assault and murder crimes, 2 black men were sitting in jail. Tension was rising as a large mob of about 5,000 white people gathered outside trying to take matters in their own hands. They were demanding the release of 2 people, George Richardson and Joe Jones. George was accused of raping a white woman, and Joe was accused of murdering a white man. Riots broke out. 4 whites, 6 Negroes dead, 70 wounded in Springfield race riot. As police were sensing danger, the county sheriff, with help from Harry Looper, a white business owner, secretly removed the two prisoners from the back door and put them on a train and transported them to another jail in Bloomington, Illinois. Once the mob learned of this move, they erupted in mass racial violence. The mob headed to the black neighborhoods, looting and damaging black-owned stores, destroying their homes, lynching two important members of the black community, Scott Burton and an 84-year-old guy by the name of William Donegan. Springfield endured racial violence for days until the Illinois governor, Charles Deanan, called in the Illinois National Guard to bring the riots under control. About 150 participants were arrested. Very few were ever convicted of any crimes. Mob spirit rules Springfield. Many died, including black and white residents. Dozens of black homes and businesses burned to the ground, causing property damage of about $150,000, about $5.1 million today. Thousands of black residents packed up their families, moved out of Springfield. Some never returned. Joe Jones was eventually tried, convicted, and hanged for the murder of clergy Ballard. George Richardson was set free after his accuser, Mabel Hellam, recanted her story. Jack Johnson makes history. He's the first black boxing heavyweight champion. He swiftly rose to prominence in the world of boxing, capturing the world colored heavyweight title in 1903. However, his white opponents dismissed him, or potential white opponents. On December 26th, Jack Jones defeated the reigning champion Tommy Burns in Sydney, Australia, becoming the first black man to hold the heavyweight championship of the world. Johnson would change the boxing world that day and challenge white supremacy. Bosnian crisis. Another thing going on in Europe. No big deal. No big deal, right? Nothing. The Bosnian crisis erupted on October 5th when Austria-Hungary announced the annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which were territories within the sovereignty of the Ottoman Empire under the Austro-Hungary administration since 1878. It sparked protests from all the great powers, France, Germany, Great Britain, Italy, Japan, Russia, and the United States, and Austria-Hungary's Balkan neighbors, Serbia and Montenegro. But it was thought to be just another European incident without wide-range implications, although Russia would get more involved in the area with a wary eye on Austria-Hungary. You want that car? That's the Henry Ford Museum. Anybody want to drive in that car? 1908 Model T. It's my friend Don Cundy right there talking to my wife. The Model T was introduced. Henry Ford wanted the Model T to be affordable, simple to operate, durable. The vehicle was one of the first mass-produced vehicles allowing Ford to achieve his aim of manufacturing the universal car. The Ford company would sell the vehicle between $260, $8,900 today, and $850, $29,000 today, as Henry Ford passed production savings onto his consumers. The vehicle became famous for its name, the Tin Lizzie. Possible origins include the popularity of the female name Lizzie during that period, or maybe to a Model T race car named Old Liz. New York to Paris car race. The New York to Paris car race was a 21,000-mile automobile race. It took place February 12th through July 30th. The race featured 6 cars and was a considerable challenge for the drivers who faced many obstacles. The race crossed the United States, Canada, Japan, Siberia, Eastern Europe. Although there were few paved roads, no gas stations along the way, the state of automobile technology at the time made the race difficult. The drivers faced snowdrifts, Arctic cold, and other challenging weather conditions. In Alaska, the drivers had to cross in order to arrive at the Bering Strait, which separated the American wilderness from the Russian ones. The race organizers started in the middle of winter with the hope that the strait would be frozen. The course then led through Siberia, which nobody had traveled by car before, and then there was Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Paris. 22,000 miles in an age when the horse was considered more reliable than the horseless carriage. This guy wins, Prince Sipino Borghese. He was the winner. He had donkeys helping him and mules, and sipped oily water from the radiator to relieve his thirst. What he got out of it? Well, bottle of champagne. Singer Building was the biggest building in the world. Located at Broadway and Liberty Street in Lower Manhattan, the Singer Building was originally constructed in 1896 by Ernest Flagg for Frederick Bourne, the then president of the Singer Sewing Machine Corporation. Anybody have a Singer sewing machine at home? A couple of you did. The original structure was red brick and stone with a mansard roof in 1906. 7 years after the completion of the first building, work began on the new building, which was to incorporate the old structure while becoming the tallest building in the world. New building was considered to be an engineering feat, towering over the city. The only structure taller in the world was the Eiffel Tower. People could pay 50 cents, $17 today, to go up to the 40th floor and see the view. There was an asteroid hits in Siberia. It's called the Tunguska asteroid. And it plunged into the Earth's atmosphere, exploded in the skies over Siberia. Local eyewitnesses in the sparsely populated region said they saw a fireball and they heard a large explosion. They also reported massive forest fires, trees blown over for miles because of low population density. Very few human casualties resulted, but many herds of reindeer perished. Was it a fireball? Nobody seems to know. Finally, we go with Wilbur Wright. Anybody want to take a ride in the plane sitting like that? You don't want to? It'd be cool for about 40 seconds, up and down. Anyway, that's Wilbur Wright. On December 31st at Camp de Orgors, 6.8 miles east of Le Mans, France, Wilbur Wright flew a 1907 Wright Flyer a distance of 124.7 kilometers or 77.5 miles over a triangular course in 2 hours, 20 minutes, 23 seconds, setting a record for duration and distance. He won the first Michelin trophy and 20,000 francs prize, estimated $10 million today was worth. So that's New Year's Eve in Times Square today. That's what it looks like, as opposed to 1908. The Times Square ball has been lowered every year since 1907, 1908, with the exceptions of 1942 and 43, when the ceremony was suspended due to the wartime dim out of lights in New York City. However, crowds did gather in Times Square that year and greeted the new year with a minute of silence, ringing of chimes from sound trucks parked at the base of the tower. Two American networks, Disney's ABC and Warner Brothers Discovery's CNN, provide hours-long coverage of the Times Square ball drop. Dick Clark's New Year's Rocking Eve first aired on December 31st, 1972. So whatever happened to Take Me Out to the Ball Game? It becomes a baseball song, even though it wasn't. Take Me Out to the Ball Game ranked in survey polls as one of the top 10 songs of the 20th century, and is third only to Happy Birthday and the Star-Spangled Banner as one of the most easily recognizable songs in America. Jack Norwood saw his first baseball game in 1928, 20 years after he wrote the song, lyrics. Albert von Tilzer went to his first baseball game in 1940, 32 years later. Take Me Out to the Ball Game was honored as the 2008 Songwriters Hall of Fame towering song. Cracker Jack has replaced the toy gift inside the package with a QR code which can be used to download a baseball-themed game. Maybe you bought Cracker Jack for that 1 cent toy in it. Can't even get it anymore. Probably worth money. There's Taft, there's Roosevelt. Taft and Roosevelt, friends since the 1890s, had a falling out. Taft's conservatism angered Roosevelt, so he challenged Taft for the party nomination at the 1912 Republican National Convention. When Taft and his conservative allies narrowly prevailed, Roosevelt rallied his progressive supporters, launched a third-party bid. Woodrow Wilson won the 1912 presidential election because of the split. Taft would become the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States in 1921. Theodore Roosevelt Park, last week actually. He's regarded as the first modern president of the United States. He made the president, rather than the political parties or Congress, the center of American politics. His progressive platform encompassed nearly every progressive ideal, later enshrined in the New Deal by Franklin Roosevelt, the Fair Deal by Harry Truman, the New Frontier by John Kennedy, and the Great Society by Lyndon Johnson. But he embraced eugenics and apparently had a strong belief in white supremacy. That is the border between the United States and Mexico and Tijuana all those years ago. That little kid's 40 years old now. In 1929, the Johnson-Reed Law imposed severe quotas on immigration. Reed proclaimed in the New York Times op-ed piece in 1924 that America's days as a melting pot are over. There have been a few revisions to the act, but build the wall, immigration, illegal aliens, and undocumented are major buzzwords in political campaigns, and seemingly no politician from any side of the political spectrum has a solution. But pundits on cable TV make money off the issue. However, none of these TV pundits or newspaper op-ed contributors, I've been both, or talk radio experts have a solution. The NAACP came out of the Springfield riots, that's W.E.B. Du Bois, less than a month prior to William Howard Taft's inaugural on February 12, 1909, the date of Abraham Lincoln's 100th birthday. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People was established in New York by an interracial group of activists, partially in response to the 1908 Springfield race riot in Illinois. Lynching, before I get into lynching, Jack Johnson. He held on to his boxing title until 1915. White society didn't like him. There were race riots following his fights with the Great White Hope. Anybody see that on Broadway, that play? Contenders and political elites eventually had him arrested. On May 24th, 2018, Trump pardoned Jack Johnson, convicted of violating the Mann Act in 1913 by taking his white girlfriend across state lines. That whole law, the Mann Law, was if you're a guy, you couldn't take a girl across state lines, which means I probably violated the Mann Act as well, and so did so many others. Johnson surrendered to U.S. authorities in 1920, he served 10 months in prison. His story was the focus in the Pulitzer Prize-winning Broadway play, The Great White Hope, starring James Earl Jones in 1969. A 2006 book, Unforgivable Blackness, The Rise and Fall of Jack Johnson, was turned into a PBS special. Oh, that little thing in Serbia, and this is Franz Ferdinand, the Archduke, getting killed or getting shot and killed in back on June 28, 1914 in Serbia. The immediate cause of World War I was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary. A Serbian nationalist terrorist group called the Black Hand sent groups to assassinate the Archduke on June 28, 1914. The Black Hand group had been plotting some sort of revenge for the Austrian annexation of Bosnia. See the USA drive a Chevrolet? Well, that's not a Chevrolet, that's a Ford. On June 16, 1903, Henry Ford and 12 others invested $28,000, slightly more than $1 million today, and created the Ford Motor Company. The first car built by the company was sold on July 15, 1903. In the 19 years of existence, the Model T sold 15,500,000 cars in the US, 1 million in Canada, 250,000 in Great Britain. The motor age arrived, owing mostly to Ford's vision of the car as an ordinary man's utility rather than a rich man's luxury. Ford, though, was truly a terrible person, though Adolf Hitler thought highly of him. And there is one of those planes from back then. Actually, that's 1903. That's Wilbur Wright and Orville Wright. Wilbur Wright died of typhoid fever on May 30th, 1912. He was 45. He, along with his brother Orville, achieved international fame by designing, building, and flying the first airplane on December 17th, 1903, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. Their contributions to aviation remain unparalleled. Thank you so much. Any questions, any comments? What do you think? That's 1908. That's ancient history. Isn't it? However, how many of the problems still remain from 1908? How many of those problems are still here? Quite a few of them. 116 years later, still no solutions to immigration, race relations. Yes. Go ahead. Done? Okay, so we'll see you next month. Take care.